The centenary of the Easter Rising will be marked in less than 18 months, and there's still no government plan for exactly how the commemoration will look. Today there was fresh controversy over suggestions that some of the commemorative events could be opened up to sponsorship, a sensible way of funding the centenary or a crass sale of our heritage. Fran McNulty reports.
Easter 1916, several locations across Dublin seized, an Irish Republic proclaimed. Commemorations are held each year. 2016 will see the biggest of those. Events will take place all over the country, but funding such a wide range is already an issue. One proposal: corporate sponsorship.
It was an idea I put forward, but I think it's just common sense. The state isn't particularly good at putting on cultural, artistic events, but there are lots of people who are, and if they had the funding, and so long as it's all done in good taste and as is appropriate, I think it would make a great difference.
So far, more than €20 million has been allocated to help fund capital and other projects associated with the 1916 commemoration. This €22 million comes from the sale of state assets. In the recent budget, €4 million was allocated to help the arts and education sectors to participate in the commemorations.
Whilst principal events such as those taking place at the GPO will be state-funded, the Minister for Arts, Heather Humphreys, has said she is open to the possibility of corporate sponsorship. The question is, how would the men and women of 1916 feel about events to commemorate their sacrifice being sponsored by corporate entities?
Something ran through my head today. What would the 7 signatories, and indeed the men and women of 1916 who fought for Irish freedom, think of this proposal? I know what they would say about it. They would say, bury it. Never let corporate put their hands on our property or our rising.
I don't want to be snobbish about this. There probably are sponsors who wouldn't fit in well and might send out the wrong message. For example, I don't think there should be alcohol companies or tobacco companies. After that, it's a question of taste and what's appropriate.
I don't believe it's any type of common sense proposal. I do believe that the 1916 commemorations and celebrations and commemorative centres belong to the people of Ireland and should be ran by the state, who are a safe pair of hands in relation to organising and running and taking care. If we allow anything to go out to private companies like Agio or any other big massive firm, within 2 to 3 years you'll have their labels, you'll have their signs, you'll have the big money men and women in, and we will no longer own it.
Already a range of capital projects are either underway or planned, the largest at the GPO. Developments are also planned in Kilmainham, and some historic sites such as Pearse's Cottage and Richmond Barracks are also being developed. This summer, the Advisory Group on Commemorations was critical of government plans. It claimed there was no sense of urgency and said greater leadership was needed.
We were genuinely concerned, not that there aren't a great number of very good things being done at the present time, but that there was an absence of coordination and energy. I feel that our sense of urgency has been appreciated by the government. I feel there is a new impetus, and I believe on the 12th of November that the government's plans will be made public, and it's very important then that there is genuine public consultation, that the plan of the 12th of November won't be the last word, but at least the people should be and must be consulted.
Minister Heather Humphreys will be joined by Taoiseach Enda Kenny to announce details of the commemoration programme next week. Primetime has learned that specific events to include the family of those who fought in the Rising will be scheduled.
We must remember the men, women and children who gave their lives in 1916. The integrity and the dignity and the respect of those men, women and children must be adhered to for now and forever.
Fran McNulty reporting. I'm joined now in studio by UCD Professor of Modern Irish History Diarmuid Ferriter, who's a member of the Expert Advisory Group on Commemorations, and by Independent TD Catherine Murphy, who's on the All-Party Consultation Group on Commemorations and whose own grandfather took part in the Rising. Catherine Murphy, to start with you, and you heard Christy Burke there, a lot of people are probably going to agree with him that there's no place for corporate sponsorship of our history.
Yeah, I think first of all that the state events have to be state events, and they have to be absolutely funded by the state and run by the state. The notion that you would have some sort of logo attaching itself to, the like of the commemoration of the 1916 Rising would be absolutely outrageous. I certainly would be open-minded on some of the smaller local events attracting some sponsorship, because I think it's going to be necessary that we do have a widespread kind of understanding of what happens, and I think if it's that kind of sponsorship or some additional money, that's fine. But part of the reason why Maurice Manning says that some of the cultural institutions are not good at running events, it's because they're absolutely starved for cash. They're some of them are working on just oxygen at the moment, and you can't criticise them if you don't fund them and if you take the staff out of those institutions, and an awful lot is going to be expected of them, and it's unfair to expect it of them unless you're willing to fund it.
Okay, well, Diarmuid Ferriter, there is an argument there, obviously. There's times are tough, money is tight. Surely every possible source of revenue should be tapped to try and put on a decent show in 2016.
I think when people hear the word corporate alongside the 1916 Rising, it's going to jar, it's going to stick in their throat, there's no doubt about that. And I don't think it's at all appropriate. But you've got to distinguish, of course, between official state commemoration, which needs to be state funded, and indeed cultural institutions that need to be properly state funded. And then what's going to go on at local level? Most commemoration is not going to be centralised. It's going to be led by communities, it's going to be led by local history societies, it's going to be led by educators. So are local businesses going to perhaps step in and sponsor some initiatives there that could be very worthwhile? Is there anything wrong with that? Perhaps not. But we also have to look at what would be the role of the local authorities, for example. Think of all the wonderful art centres around the country that are under the auspices of local authorities. But they need to be funded. And I think the reason why this story is in the news today is because of the vacuum that is there. And if you go back to the proceedings of these various advisory groups, we both represent different groups. There's the Oireachtas group, there's the academics group, if you like. What we were saying in the summer was that there was an urgency for clarity, for leadership, for us to be given a programme to advise on. We still haven't got it. And we made the point then that because of this lack of clarity, there was a sense of a vacuum. It was indicative of a lack of leadership. Then what goes into the vacuum is this kind of thing, where something seems to be just plucked out of the air, or something develops legs or momentum because it may have been mentioned in some, in some particular forum, and then suddenly that's the story. If there was clarity there, if there was a programme, if there was some sense of what the government wants to do or is planning to do and how it is going to fund it, well then we would have much more of an informed and engaged conversation about this.
Okay, well, Catherine, I know you've been critical of the lack of a plan. We now hear that Minister Humphreys is going to give us our plan on the 12th, which I think is Wednesday week. So it's been a long time coming, but at least it seems to be on the way.
Yeah, and I think it's welcome that we're going to get it. It should have happened 3 years ago. And basically, then there's going to be a consultation period. Then you're really into next year before you actually have a physical plan in place. The difficulty then is that people have lead-in times for organising events, for booking venues and all of the rest of it, and it is incredibly tight. It's been something that, and I completely agree with the vacuum that that we've just been talking about.
And what's the problem? Is the problem at a political level that there's been changes in portfolios and that sort of thing?
No, I mean I think we would both say the same thing has happened at both of our committees in parallel, that there's been a demand for this plan, but that it hasn't been produced or understood that it was needed. And very often you go along to a meeting and you'll hear about some event that has happened in retrospect, and then you often hear people saying, "Oh, I'd love to go along to that if I knew it was on."
And how often has your committee been meeting?
I think since 2011, I think we've met about between 15 and 20 times.
We've been meeting every 2 months as well. I mean, I do think the change in ministries is relevant because there are people who are dealing with it. It is under their brief, and then that changes, and then people have to work their way into a new job. But that just highlights the need for some kind of coordinating group that has a high public profile, that is engaging with people, that is outside of these ministerial reshuffles. And again, that should have been in place a long time ago. What we're seeing instead now is a lot of bad temper, a lot of a feeling of exclusion, including the relatives, who have been very vocal, and quite rightly they've been vocal about this, because they have seen all sorts of stories, all sorts of ideas circulating. They don't feel that they are being engaged with. And you've got to look at the role of the state in commemorating the 1916 Rising. It is about giving a strong sense of this belonging to the people, as opposed to being the sole preserve of the state or an elite concern.
At this stage, are you confident that they'll get it together on time?
No.
Catherine?
I think it'll be less ambitious than it should be, but I think a lot more could have been done. But I think we've got to remember that there's a lot more beyond the Rising, and I think that. And may I just say one thing? Because women.
Sorry, we've actually just run completely out of time,
right, okay,
so I'll have to cut you out there. But thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Miriam.